Hello everyone, and thank you for coming. What I'd like to talk to you about today is the usefulness of simulated environments for the embodiment of humans as well as artificial general intelligences. And because of the time constraints, I won't be able to go into depth in any particular area, but I'd like to give you a quick survey of what's happening in the field and what I think will be interesting that happens in the coming years. First of all, we can define artificial general intelligence, although Ben has given a good overview of it earlier. Essentially, the core idea is that it's the ability of an agent to perform complex tasks in complex environments that are new and novel and weren't anticipated by the creator. And furthermore, the agent needs to be able to do this type of thing in a dynamic and real-time environment. It can't say, well, let's put the world on hold while I go think about this for a while and come back with a solution. And as was mentioned, this is distinct from the typical approach in industry today of narrow AI, where we are able to achieve some impressive successes by dividing problems up into narrow subsections, but likely, as Ben pointed out, this is not the path, or not the shortest path to human-level general intelligence and beyond. Now, as David Hansen alluded to earlier, this is an important avenue because it will fundamentally transform every aspect of human existence in society. And I'll go into a little bit more detail into my thoughts on that a little bit later. And it's a very interesting field to work in because it gives you the opportunity not only to have an impact in the world through this work, but also to transcend the way that you observe and interact with the world through the creation of this type of machines. I'm sure you're all somewhat familiar with the notion of simulated environments, and you've seen examples like Second Life that came out in the recent years. And to a certain level of complexity, these provided environments where people were able to join a virtual place and create somewhat complex landscapes and social interactions, and to a certain extent modify and interact with their environment, create artificial societies and economics, and gambling and other types of complex behavior until that was outlawed. However, simulated environments are also quite prevalent in the sciences, for example, in physics simulators, where essentially we're using computer modeling to focus on relevant aspects of a problem inside a computer. I think it's useful to address the question of what are the useful applications of simulated environments by dividing it into two different perspectives. In other words, what are they good for today in the research we're doing now, and what can they potentially be good for in the future as we make more progress along these avenues? I'd like to point out that life is fundamentally about working under constraints. We're working under the constraint of time and resources. If this weren't the case, just pause and think about this for a moment. You could solve any particular problem that you encounter simply by doing a search through every possible solution, trying it out, and seeing how that worked out for you. An interesting thought experiment along those lines would be to imagine a room full of monkeys with computer terminals for each monkey. Now, if you leave these monkeys in that room for quite a while, they might end up banging away at the keyboard and producing random patterns of text on the screens, and after some long amount of time, one of them might have figured out to type the word monkey on the computer screen. Now, along the same train of thought, it's conceivable that these monkeys could write a complex computer program like Microsoft Windows, but this is not going to happen in any remotely reasonable amount of time, probably not even the age of our present universe. Because of that, it may seem abstract, but really it's an interesting philosophical and scientific point that all problem solving is done under a constraint of time and resources. And I think that's a good thing because it's one of the things that gives life a source of interesting challenge. Excuse me. Fundamentally, simulation and modeling is about choosing salient elements from a scene or from an experiment. Now, this is very well known in the sciences, and it's essentially the basis of the scientific method, where you need to take a complex environment and extract those elements that you want to model in the computer simulation to better understand patterns in the relationships between different elements inside the environment, while not taking into account all potential complex factors that may come in from external to the environment if you have hypothesized that these aren't relevant to the type of phenomena that you're studying. Models are often adapted, but it's a key element that there is simplification in order to extract meaning from the underlying phenomena. In the context of artificial general intelligence and robot research, you'll quickly realize that it's difficult to control robots in physical environments and to perform tasks like walking across surfaces with different consistencies on the surface without the robot stumbling or falling, or to perform object recognition and manipulation of objects. This can be extremely challenging, and while these are certainly very interesting and important problems to solve, in some cases they aren't the same problems that you need to be solving to solve the engineering of artificial minds that are able to adapt themselves and evolve to higher levels of understanding of their environments and of themselves. So sometimes you do need to work on these things in parallel, but in many cases it makes more sense to divide them and use a simulated environment to focus on this particular research that we're working on. As Ben mentioned earlier, it can be a very useful application of simulations to teach a proto-artificial general intelligence and to bootstrap them through various stages of cognitive development. Essentially, once you've got an architecture that you think is going to be effective in engineering general intelligence, this architecture is not likely to be fully developed out of the box. Rather, it needs to spend a significant amount of time interacting with its environment and running internal processes to form meaningful patterns and extract relationships from its environment that it can use to develop in stages to reach higher levels of intelligence. So to do this, you need to have a simulation environment that presents the AGI or proto-AGI with complex patterns and interesting sensory input data. And furthermore, you need an existing general intelligence to talk to the robot, to interact with it, perhaps to train it, and to allow it to interact with you as it continues learning. Now, the most common form of general intelligence that we're familiar with today happens to be a human. And because of that, it's interesting to think about how we can embody humans in simulated environments along with proto-AGIs and allow the human to help the AGI in its evolution. Another interesting but different point is that when you're in a simulated environment, you have the flexibility of changing the speed of the time clock. Because essentially the passage of time in a simulated environment is simply a computer clock that is set in the simulation. And you have the freedom, constrained by any resource limitations that you may have, to speed up this clock in cases where the human is not interacting in that particular scenario. And what that means is you can have the AGI perform rapid simulations and interactions with its environment to more efficiently develop in faster than real time. If you look at this illustration here, you see an image of a human brain that's been carefully extracted from a skull and placed in a vat. It's somehow kept alive inside here and has these electrodes that have been connected to the brain in such a manner that the brain receives the same stimuli and is able to affect on a perceived external environment such that the brain believes it's actually outside in Tucson, Arizona, walking around in the sun. What I'm saying here is that human virtual embodiment using these types of devices that I'll show you on the next few slides is a stepping stone along the way to more advanced technologies that will be likely to emerge in the coming decades. So we will be using technologies such as brain-computer interfacing to allow us to enter these virtual environments. And a bit further in the future, we may be able to use technologies that have been discussed earlier, such as mind uploading. But this requires a fair amount of research and development to understand the way that cognitive processes and memories are represented in the human brain and furthermore, to replicate this in a computational substrate.
Okay, is that another one? Yeah, there is. Anybody got the other microphone in their pocket? Yeah. Low battery. It says low battery. Yeah, there's another mic sitting around somewhere. Does anybody know where it is?
Okay. Maybe Amy walked off for the afternoon.
Just continue to talk, but raise your voice. Okay. Pretend you're an opera singer. One moment.
No, this one.
Oh, there it is. What was it? In your pocket.
Thanks, Adam. Sorry. All right, so as I was saying, eventually we may be able to achieve mind uploading, where we're able to replicate the patterns of mind activity and memory in a computational substrate. But there's quite a bit of work to do along these lines. And conceptually, we may be able to develop a translation of mental activity into a not so similar computational substrate, but that's also quite speculative. Now, if we think about what comes after this type of virtual embodiment, where you are using these devices in between you and the simulation, and you start to think of your mind structure in a different way, as a network of patterns that are interacting with each other to create dynamics and are also interacting with an external environment, it allows you to perceive this type of network in a more flexible manner. And you can think about some things that aren't evident in the current world that we know today. For example, you can think about combining minds, and furthermore, extending minds using AGIs in some interesting ways. You can think about extending your mind by connecting it to an AGI, initially maybe through a fairly distinct separation, but as you develop this technology, the complex interconnections between the two entities become much harder to differentiate, and it becomes harder to say that this is separate from this, and in a way, the mind evolves to become one with the AGI that you have developed. And furthermore, these types of augmented minds would have the opportunity to interact with each other in fairly interesting ways that we aren't able to do with our current human minds. In addition to this type of mind interaction, we can also transcend the types of environments that we see in today's world through the use of simulations. There's been some interesting science fiction literature in the past decade. Some of the good books from Neil Stephenson, and also this more recent book called Ready Player One. And these books explore what it would be like for a human to be able to spend quite a bit of their time in a complex virtual environment. I think you'd find them interesting if you haven't already read them. I'd like to clarify something here, though. I do believe that our current world is also quite a beautiful and interesting place, and I don't want us to fall prey to black and white thinking, to think that it's an either-or scenario, or to say that we don't need to pursue this avenue because we have so much unexplored opportunities in our present world. And I love robots too, but the key point here is that we can simultaneously pursue multiple interesting paths as each of our particular interests leads us. In fact, you can look at this hierarchy in a more abstract manner, and presently we're living in a certain level of pattern space. And that's the world that we all know and are familiar with. But conceivably, as our understanding of theoretical physics evolves, we may find that our current understanding of the universe is likely not perfectly correct. And there may exist other possible alternate universes or external from our current universe abstractions that you can think of as a meta-pattern space. And And on the other direction, you can think of an engineered pattern space where through our creations of engineering and simulation technology, we're able to create fully real, in a sense, environments within this environment. The point is that the distinction between what is virtual and what is real may not be so sharply defined as is commonly held. I think we have an inherent bias to believe that what we are used to is what is real. And it causes us to think of virtual reality, in fact, the name itself, as being somehow fake. But really, there may not be such a fundamental difference, but rather this is a practical difference due to the current state of the technology and the way that we are able to apply it. Because virtual technology today is somewhat primitive, so obviously it would cause us to bias in this direction. Now there's some interesting projects that have just came out recently that are building on many decades of research that I'll go through quickly here to share in case you haven't seen all of them. This is the Oculus Rift virtual reality head-mounted display that the development version was just released recently, and they're currently preparing for a consumer launch. And they are targeting a price point of just a couple $100 US, which is pretty remarkable to provide this type of device at a fairly affordable price point. And when you put this on, it immerses you in a virtual environment using a head tracker so that as you move around, it does quite a good job of adjusting your field of view based on your movements. And it also presents a three-dimensional experience by mapping different images to each eye with a fairly wide field of view so that you, to a certain extent, feel that you're within this environment. Now, it's still an engineering prototype, so it's by no means a perfect replication. But it's an exciting stepping stone that wasn't so hard to access until recently. Here you can see an image of myself using the Oculus Rift in the OpenCog virtual world embodiment along with the Proto-AGI agent so that I can be there and interact with it in this type of virtual reality. There's also some other technologies like the Leap motion controller, which allows you to send the motions of your hands in very fine detail to a simulated environment. And the Sixth Sense development model of this motion controller. And then this one on the right here, if anyone has read the book I referred to earlier, is an omnidirectional treadmill, which allows you to walk with your physical body in all directions and have this type of movement mapped directly to the virtual simulation. Another interesting project comes out of the founder of Second Life. Philip Rosedale has just recently announced the launch of a new project called High Fidelity, and they're looking at how to create more immersive virtual environments that take advantage of low latency interaction between intelligences. And as you can see in these very rough prototype sketches, they're looking at modeling joint movement rather than simple animations, and using various technologies to interface between our physical world and these simulations. I think it's useful to categorize the pattern richness of simulation environments across 4 different distinct categories. On one level, we have the types of environments I mentioned at the beginning, which are intentional simplifications, such as we would use in scientific model creation. Another common category, however, would be unintentional simplifications, where the environment is not meant to have a lower level of complexity, but rather is like that due to engineering restrictions based on available technology. At some stage, although we are not there yet, we will be able to engineer simulated environments that have an equivalent level of complexity, although they may not be equivalent in all details, but at a level of complexity equivalent to the reality that we all know today. Therefore, once we have achieved that goal, we will be able to move towards the 4th and final category of simulation environments, what I call a transcendent richness of simulated environment pattern richness. In other words, we would have an environment that actually goes beyond what is possible in the physical world that we are currently present in. I'd like to point out that all of these notions are fairly abstract in this type of short talk, but there's a fair amount of interesting scientific and philosophical literature that I can point you to if you'd like to read more about this. There's a lot of limitations in the current software that we have available to us for this type of work. And we need to have software that allows us to create what I call meta environments, where you have the ability to perform radical modification of the environment, both in form and function. In other words, you need to be able to reconfigure, as a participant inside the virtual world, what the environment structure is like and what type of function happens with the structures inside the environment. There's some various approaches to do this, such as rich voxel-based physics, where essentially a voxel is a three-dimensional pixel, and you can create structures out of these types of objects at multiple levels of a hierarchy. For example, you can represent things at a very small level that may be analogous to a molecular level. And you can also create structures at a real-world level that humans would interact with day to day, or at a meta level that represent grand structures that we are certainly not able to interact with. Or you could also use an approach such as blocks and beads, as Ben has referred to in his writing, where you would use these small spherical representations that are able to combine together to create dynamic physics-like properties, such as cracking of solid objects or pouring of liquid-like fluids that really aren't possible in more simplified environments like Second Life. I believe it's important for this type of work to happen in the context of a free and open source software collaboration. And really that's for two reasons. First of all, I think that it allows you to take advantage of the input from a wide community of enthusiasts, and also because I think it's more beneficial for our society to promote free and open source software in this domain. So there's quite a bit to do, and it's an interesting field to work on. Here's a book that Ben already mentioned, so I won't spend too much time on it, but it's called A Cosmist Manifesto. Actually, it's published by Humanity Plus, and it gives an interesting philosophy that I think you all might find fascinating, that essentially outlines an approach based on the pursuit of three areas: joy, growth, and choice, in the context of transhumanism and technological development. It has some interesting chapters on the world as a simulation, on transhuman artificial general intelligence, brain-computer interfacing. And to transition on, I believe that you can look at the types of transcendence that are available to us through the combination of artificial general intelligence and simulated rich virtual environments in two different ways. First way is the transcendence of self. David Hansen alluded to this earlier, where we have the potential to engineer artificial general intelligence that we can use autonomously, for example, as artificial scientists, or problem solvers, or researchers. But in addition, we can integrate them with ourselves to create a new type of self that allows us to continue in our own self-directed evolution. And it allows us to, with these types of more complex minds, we would be able to experience the meaning of living and experiencing reality on a level that goes beyond what we're able to presently understand. In addition to transcending ourselves, we can transcend our environments using these types of simulated environments to go beyond the constraints of our physical world and realize new levels of reality and complexity that we are not familiar with today. This also has important aspects in how it will affect society. And nothing here is guaranteed, so it's up to each of us that choose to work in this field to push the flow of research in society in a direction that we believe is beneficial. AGI has significant potential as an intelligence augmentation, as a scientific researcher, as I mentioned, and as a form of self-transcendence. And furthermore, it gives us an opportunity, as Hugo de Guerres mentioned, to transcend current artificial divisions that are currently implemented between geopolitical regions. Much as the internet has started to do, virtual environments can completely change the meaning of borders and divisions in the flow of information and resources. But again, this is not guaranteed, but rather something that we need to advocate for and work towards in our social and engineering work. the meaning of concepts such as scarcity, economic systems, what it means to experience reality, what reality itself means, these are all said to be changed rather drastically with the emergence of these technologies. Now, sometimes you think when you read lots of these exponential graphs, such as Ray Kurzweil's book contains, that we can all just sit back and watch as the exponential graph continues marching forward and see what plays out in the world. But really, if we just sat back and watched the exponential graph, actually the graph would end. So all of this is based on the fundamental involvement of humans in pushing forward this research in directions that we believe are interesting and meaningful. So I would say that we certainly live in very exciting times, and even among a group of future-thinking people, such as ourselves, I think the future will still be quite a bit more different than we're able to currently imagine and perceive with our current levels and of understanding and all the things that we're used to in the current world. So to wrap up here, by using rich simulated environments and developing artificially general intelligent machines, we can enrich our experience of life and also transcend ourselves and our environments through these technologies. Thank you. It's a good question, thank you. So I believe that my perspective is a more optimistic perspective, and I believe that there's a lot of potential benefits to engineering artificial general intelligence, but I believe that we need to do this in the context of a society that actively involves itself and advocates towards moral and ethical behavior. And I also believe that the scientific researchers themselves need to take a prominent stance in developing these types of moral architectures rather than dividing moral development and scientific research into separate fields. I think that these need to be more tightly confined or combined. But I do believe that it's not guaranteed, but it's likely that we can use these technologies in a positive manner.
What happens when these machines are just way beyond that, and what we can conceive as humans as ethical? I mean, what's ethical to a machine that's a trillion times above us? What does it even mean?
I tend to think that the distinction between us and machine probably won't be quite as clear, so quite likely we will be somewhat blended with these machines, so I'm not sure how to address the question in that type of context.
I guess we'll start the final part.
Do you believe in a variety of approaches of trying to make AI safe? Do you believe you can make an AI safe through teaching it or giving it embodiment and getting it to learn how to like humans? Or do you think it's a mathematical problem? Are there a variety of approaches that you'd like to see pursued?
So I suspect that it's not possible to prove that we will be able to engineer guaranteed beneficial AGI, but rather I think we can bias the likelihood of that, just as many things in life aren't 100% likely. We can bias the likelihood through the way that we structure our work.
Awesome. So, is there any other questions, or are we ready for the next panel?
Any questions in the audience?
Yeah, I mean, the conference is running over time, so I think we better proceed into the final panel.